Blessings and greetings, everyone. My name is Ms. Devon Wilford-Said. I'm a community activist with Change for Real Community Corporation, and I would like to do a brief presentation that I did for the National Council on Public History at their annual meeting that was held at the Ebenezer African Methodist Episcopal Church located in South Baltimore. The event was held Friday, March the 18th, 2016, and the title of their topic was The Uprising and Focus, the Image, Experience, and History of Inequality in Baltimore. The title of my presentation is Deja Vu. Number 1, the image, riots of 68. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was that vocal, charismatic civil rights leader who had once sounded the trumpet and led many nonviolent marches to protest against slavery, racism, and the oppression of the black race by many prejudiced white Caucasians. Excuse me. A race of people who had initially thought that their race was the superior race of all people because of their skin color, economic status, and positions of authority in high places of government. It was back during the time when white skin was against black skin, violence against the nonviolent, desegregation against segregation, rich whites against poor blacks, and whites who became black sympathizers who were against their white counterparts. And they all had taken a part in sketching out the embedded image of disparity and racial inequality against people of color for many decades. My experience, I was at the tender age of 14 and was residing on the 1000 block of East Biddle Street back when the Reverend Dr. King had been violently assassinated in April of 68. It was on the news and had been broadcasted in mostly every city and state. Yes, the retaliation had begun, and it had reverberated throughout the minds of many young black men and even older people of color who were determined to exact vengeance. The same thing that I watched on television was now happening in my neighborhood and right down the street from where I'd lived. It was truly a nightmare for my best friend and I because we felt helpless and could only watch in horror as we witnessed some young people and older men as they threw objects such as bricks, bottles, and sticks in the cars of innocent white passengers, and then pulled them out of their cars and began to beat them mercilessly for no reason at all. And there was nothing we could do to try to stop it. However, some of the older residents who lived up the street from us came out and tried to render first aid to some of the victims when it was safe to do so. And when the police were finally called, they were unable to get there on time because they had been overwhelmed with other emergencies such as protecting public property and keeping city businesses from being vandalized and looted. We had to put black colored cloths on our doorposts as a sign of black power so that our homes would be passed over and not broken into, which was a symbolic gesture similar to what the children of Israel had done, with the lamb's blood being smeared over their doorposts so that death would pass over them. That whole ordeal was very confusing and made no sense to me because personally, I never experienced racial discrimination before. In fact, I had lived my early childhood back in the state of North Carolina and was raised by my beloved grandmother before my mom had relocated us to live in Baltimore, Maryland. My grandmother would often remind me to always treat others as I would want to be treated, and racial bias was never part of that equation. Plus, my best friend happened to be a white Caucasian girl, and she was my neighbor who lived a little ways down the road from my grandmother's house. Her name was Iris. She was the daughter of my grandmother's employer, and we were like family. Skin color had never been an issue with us. After experiencing the riots of 68, my life had taken a turn for the better. I had decided to use some of my leadership and organizing skills to volunteer and help train public housing residents how to become effective as proactive community leaders. When I had been called into the ministry by God, I became an ordained minister, and and started to spread his unconditional love and compassion in order to help others in need. I was more determined than ever not to allow racism and discrimination to hinder me from doing that which was right. Although Dr. King's dream had been silenced for a little while because all of the civil unrest, racial bigotry, and extreme violence, his vision will live on for many years to come through positive change and by the voices from the future drum majors who stood for peace and justice so that the light of freedom and equality could never be extinguished. Number 2, the image. The Uprising in Baltimore 2015. The late Freddie Gray, a young black man who just happened to be at the wrong place and unfortunately at the wrong time. A young man who became just another statistic and numbered with his previous black male victims that were violently taken down by the hands of law enforcement officers who were determined to inflict bodily harm upon them or even to kill. Freddie Gray, who was only 24 years old and who had struggled most of his wayward life just to live and survive on the poverty-stricken streets of West Baltimore. A young black man who was found standing on a street corner and minding his own business, who had suddenly looked up from where he stood and noticed some very angry cops charging at him. His heart now gripped in fear as he panicked to run for his life, not knowing why he was even being chased down by those officers. Freddie, who never knew nothing about a motive or probable cause, who now was in extreme pain from being dragged into a police paddy wagon without being properly seat buckled in before being courted off to jail. Freddie, who never knew why his life would be over in just a matter of days because he had later died from his injuries that were sustained during his initial arrest. My experience. Speaking from a minister's point of view, my experiences during the Baltimore Uprising of 2015 can be described as that of history repeating itself, or as some would say, deja vu. My heart was saddened even before the uprising in Baltimore because of the racially motivated killings back in 2014 of the late Mr. Eric Garner of New York City and the young Michael Brown of Ferguson, Missouri, both of whom were black males along with a list of many others who had been violently killed at the hands of racist law enforcement officers. Even though I had not physically participated in any of the Black Lives Matter protest rallies or demonstration marches held before and after the arrest and the death of the late Freddie Gray, I had made it my business to follow all the updates via the news media. I had also faithfully stood upon my prayer watch and prayed that peace and justice would prevail against the evils of racial disparity between blacks and whites that never seems to want to go away. Number 3, history of inequality in Baltimore. Although the young Freddie Gray was a far cry from the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., our historical nonviolent civil rights leader who had protested against racism, inequality, and discrimination back in the early 60s, Freddie's 21st century death, ironically, had also took place in the month of April. And after he had been killed, his death had also caused an uprising of violence from young and old people alike who had protested and shouted, "No justice, no peace." Then later came the riots, arson, looting, and vandalism that eventually had depleted most of the city's resources and had left it in a state of an emergency. Number 4, closing comments. Certain black neighborhoods throughout Baltimore City's north, south, east, and west side has historically gone without adequate support systems for community residents, especially the West Side Sandtown Winchester neighborhood where Freddie Gray had once lived. His community had remained so poverty-stricken and blighted that many community residents felt hopeless as far as job training resources were concerned. Freddie had been trying to survive in his crime-infested neighborhood with many vacant buildings, trashy lots, plus homelessness and young people who were alcoholics and strung out on narcotic drugs such as heroin and painkillers. And yet the status quo for meeting the needs of low-income black people from various governments have been continually ignored. powers that be does not come to terms with its past in order to make a positive change for the future, then the common good for so many who have died before and after the rise of '68 and the uprising of 2015 would only be in vain. And Dr. King's dream for freedom and equality would have been stamped void and useless. I think that the community should deal with the unrest by creating an open dialogue to resolve inequality and racism issues with law enforcement officers and other community stakeholders and partners. This can be done by creating a proactive community roundtable platform for change that should hold all parties accountable in order to restore community trust and healing. The platform should perform such tasks as conflict resolution, mediations with the police, community leaders, protesters, family members of victims, and youth, etc. Sensitivity training for all Baltimore law enforcement officers should be enforced. Network with and outreach to local, city, state, and federal government resources to participate in various sessions and have private funders to adopt and rebuild up some of the poverty-stricken neighborhoods across the city. I think that public historians can play a vital role in the process of community memory from both disturbances, and it can be done by periodically following up on a quarterly basis with the Community Roundtable platform for change sessions in order to collect data from the discussions, such as community updates, testimonials, create success stories, program evaluations, mass media engagement, and other artifacts, etc., and come together as a whole on a yearly basis to incorporate a special event that spotlights all accomplishments. Respectfully submitted, Minister Devon Wilford-Said. I will also share with you another piece that I wrote back in 2012 that pertains to this issue as well on the next video presentation. Until then, peace and blessings to you all, and God bless. See ya.